requirements. Reducing these burdensome regulations will help small companies raise capital, grow their business, and create private jobs for Americans. I have reviewed the amendments made in order by the Rules Committee to H.R. 3606, and I will be supporting some opposing others. Also, the gentleman from Delaware and I will be offering a manager's amendment which will make some technical improvements to the bill. I look forward to a lively debate here in this chamber, and I support the rule to consider this bill. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Frank.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this is a perfectly nice bill, but things are sometimes judged in comparison. It is being hailed as a bigger bill than it is, but that's what happens when you grade on a curve, as we grade on a curve. One of the great philosophers of the 20th century was a man named Henry Youngman, and one of his philosophical bits of wisdom was expressed in the question and answer, how's your wife? Compared to what? Well, compared to the output of this House so far, this is a very, very, very major bill. Compared to our economy in general, it's a good bill, but of no immediate significance in terms of jobs, and useful for the future. But as I said, I think it's important it's getting pumped up a little bit so we can avoid here as a collective body the charge that we haven't done anything. I do have one criticism of the rule, and I'd expressed this hope yesterday, and I was frustrated. A number of amendments were made in order, and I appreciate that. But every single amendment is to debate it for only 10 minutes. That's unworthy of a deliberative body. There are important questions here that are involved in these issues. And if you think these bills are important, then the amendments to them are important. Now, that's within a context of support. In most cases, we are talking about people who support the concept but have some differences about what should be there. But to say that every amendment gets debated for only 10 minutes, 5 minutes on each side, is to denigrate the deliberative function to a point which is of great concern to me. It's not as if we've been so busy that we couldn't carve out time for 20 minutes or even a half hour of debate. So I regret the dumbing down of the House, which is represented by saying that no issue will be debated for more than 10 minutes. But then I also have one other question of a procedural sort as the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. One of the bills in here, most of these bills have been through the committee. There were 6 bills. 4 have even passed the House. 2 bills, I was told, were from the committee. But one of the bills, H.R. 4088, it's got a new sponsor, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Quayle, and we've never seen that in our committee. I've checked. That bill was introduced February 24th or something. It's never had a hearing. It's never been through committee. So why are we getting a bill on the floor now that has never been seen in our committee? I would yield to the gentleman from the Rules Committee.
Well, I'm not seeking recognition, but I would say that
all right. Well, then I don't. I thought
the gentleman from Arizona has a good bill, and I encourage you to read it.
Well, I have read the bill, but to be told that we're going to, in a party that says that voted to regular order, bring out a bill, and 4088 has had no committee consideration whatsoever. The other bills have, the other 5, but it's never been brought up in a hearing. It's never been in subcommittee. It's never been in committee. And the notion that it's a good bill and therefore should be immune from any committee process is very discouraging. This is a bill that's only been in existence for a couple of weeks. And the gentleman says, well, it's a good bill, read it. Well, then I guess we don't need committees. We don't need to do anything. If it's a good bill, you read it. But the process is supposed to be one where these things go through some vetting. And so I am disappointed that we have a rule that brings a bill to the floor that has literally had no committee consideration whatsoever. Brand new bill, apparently, because it's got a brand new sponsor. We've seen nothing like this. There have been some other bills that we've had, but I've seen no bill from the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Quayle. I've seen no bill like this 4088. It hasn't had a hearing. It hasn't been to committee. And at the same time, the Rules Committee thinks that you can take all these interesting questions. Should there or shouldn't there be an exemption from, say, on pay? Is the bill your number right? And debate them all in only 10 minutes, 5 minutes on the side. That hardly serves the deliberative process.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
And I say, look, some members think The bills may have more impact than I do. I hope I'm wrong and they have it. But if you really believe the bills are this important, why then is a debate only for 10 minutes on every single amendment? On the size, on other reporting requirements, we have amendments that have been requested by the North American Securities Administrators, the state regulators. 5 minutes on the side. That is hardly a mark of people who take the deliberative process in the U.S. House of Representatives very seriously. And I thank the gentleman from Colorado.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Just so you know, the gentleman is correct. And I appreciate his viewpoint of this. This is a copy of Mr. Quayle's bill right here. It's about 1/3 of a page long, and it's a good idea that says we're going to increase the number of people who can invest in a community bank. I hope that should not require us to have to go back and do too much thinking about how great this would be. We're trying to perfect, instead of by just having an amendment, to allow our members to take part in these things with their good ideas. So I do take that what the gentleman said is correct, but good ideas are a part of this bill, and that should be what we're about here on the floor, just as an amendment that may not have gone through.
Gentleman yield?
I wish I could. I'm out of time. I've got a whole bunch of
that's
speakers,
a pity.
but I appreciate the gentleman. He'll have plenty of time. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Sessions, for his leadership on the Rules Committee and otherwise in this House. I also want to commend Mr. Fincher from Tennessee for offering this legislation. It's a very important bill. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support and speak in favor of the Jobs Act. What this legislation does is address a key concern that I hear from my constituents in western North Carolina. We know that entrepreneurship here in the United States is at a 17-year low. We also realize that the rest of the world has caught up to us in terms of their capital markets and business formation. We also know that small businesses create the majority of new jobs in the United States. So it's very important for us, in light of the new regulatory changes that have happened in the last couple of years here in Washington. The advent of Dodd-Frank that increases the cost of lending and makes it less available for small businesses. The Card Act that makes credit cards less available to the average person who tries to start their business like my father did on his credit card. We also realize that the regulatory changes, the more higher red tape that we have here in Washington, makes it more expensive to do business here in the United States. These are major concerns. These are major concerns for my constituents in western North Carolina. And I want to commend Mr. Fincher for offering the Jobs Act. We've got some very important pieces of information and policy changes in this bill. If you look at the 1990s, we had 530 IPOs on average every year. We had fewer than 65 in the year of 2009. We realize that going public is not the avenue for every business, though the dream of many small business folks. So, important component of the Jobs Act is a piece of legislation we passed that I authored here in the House with the help of my colleague from New York, Ms. Maloney, the Crowdfunding Act, which allows small businesses to access the capital markets, to sell equity rather than ask for debt, sell equity in their great startup or new idea. Crowdfunding takes the best of microfinance and crowdsourcing and uses the power of the Internet for small businesses to have offerings in their company. Now, it could be used for a tech company, certainly, to raise up to $2 million. But it could be used for a coffee shop in Hickory or Nashville in western North Carolina to raise $50,000 and sell equity in their business. These regulatory changes are very important. We have regulations and laws on the books, the 1933 Securities Act, the 1934 Securities and Exchange Act, that really were the reaction to the problems and challenges of their day. They put in restrictions in terms of advertising about your security. Well, that was a problem when the telephone was the new technology of the day. But we have the power of the Internet And people are more informed today than they were 100 years ago about investing. So we're changing these regulatory structures so that small businesses can get the capital they need to grow and expand. That's what this is all about. It doesn't fix every problem that we face today, but this is a bipartisan bill. It's a good idea. The President has spoken in favor of many of the components of this legislation, and we hope not to simply pass it out of the House on a bipartisan basis, but to ensure that we pass through the Senate and the President signs it. These are good ideas that can have an impact and help us grow and create jobs. It helps entrepreneurs. It helps small businesses. Those folks are the lifeblood of economic growth, and that's what we need to be focused on. I urge the adoption of the rule and ask my colleagues to vote for passage.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Texas has 10 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Colorado has 14 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York and author of key provisions of this bill, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership on the Rules Committee, and I rise in support of this rule and the underlying bill. It's a package of bills designed to encourage the growth of smaller companies and startups, and it contains 6 separate bills, 4 of which have already passed this body by overwhelming majorities. And I share the concerns of the ranking member, Mr. Frank, that the 17 amendments that were put in place, the adequate time has not been given to fully debate them. I do want to take issue with my good friend from North Carolina in his criticism of the CARD Act, saying that it has made it harder for Americans to receive cards. This bill that passed this body overwhelmingly with Democratic leadership, I was proud to be the lead sponsor on it, working with all of my colleagues on the Democratic side. And what it did is it stopped unfair, deceptive practices. Money magazine called this bill the best friend a credit card holder ever had, and Pew Foundation came out with a report earlier this year saying that this Democratic bill alone saved consumers in our country $10 billion in 1 year. I would say that's an advantage for consumers, an excellent goal that was championed by our President and by the Democratic leadership. I would like to take issue with this comprehensive jobs agenda. I do support it, but I think that we should be working on major job-creating opportunities, such as the transportation bill and the President's Jobs Act. And these 2 bills would create 500,000 jobs. And here we are repackaging a group of old bills that we've passed before, and it does not constitute a comprehensive jobs bill. As I said, 4 of the 6 bills have already passed the House with major support on both sides of the aisle, and I'm disturbed that 1 bill was taken from my Democratic colleague Jim Himes. I would like to quote the Washington Post. The Washington Post said, and I quote, "This Jobs Act is not new legislation, but is instead a grab bag of items that have already passed at the committee level or on the House floor by wide bipartisan votes." These previously passed bills make some useful and yet modest steps forward, but they are no substitute for a major job-creating highway bill or passage of the full American Jobs Act. These bills make modest changes for startup companies, making it easier for them to raise capital through the Internet and the solicitation of accredited investors, and loosening certain filing and regulatory requirements for startups and small banks. I would say the prime goal of the Democratic leadership is to reignite the American dream by building the pillars of success for small businesses, our entrepreneurs, and our making our economy stronger. These bills before us do help in many ways, although they are not a comprehensive jobs package. It rightly gives smaller companies and startups greater flexibility to grow and flourish. I urge the adoption of the rule and the underlying bills, and I do want to mention the Entrepreneur Access to Capital Act, which creates a new exemption from registration for crowdfunding securities. It permits a company to raise up to $2 million a year, with investors permitted to invest the lesser of $10,000 or 10% of his income annually in such companies. And I was pleased to work with my colleague, Mr. McHenry, on this bill. It has a number of others that would reduce the cost of going public and would aid in the capital formation for job creation in our country. I do want to note that the President of the United States, his administration, is supporting these bills, and I urge the passage of them. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the gentlewoman from New York makes a good point about the President's bill, a jobs bill, except it picks winners and losers and is hundreds of billions of dollars of tax increases that will continue to kill the free enterprise system, along with the other administrative things that this President is doing to the free enterprise system. So this body will not pass hundreds of billions of dollars of tax increases and then say we're trying to help people doing that. So the President, I'm sure, is entitled to his own beliefs. We're going to do the things which work, that empower the free enterprise system. Speaking of working and empower the free enterprise system, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona who has brought great ideas to this bill, and it's included in this. And I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman, Mr. Schweikert.
The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
First, I want to thank my good friend from Texas. I appreciate you yielding 4 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the rule and also the underlying bills. And I may have somewhat of a unique perspective here. Being on the Financial Services Committee, we actually started building and moving these bills and working on them, I think, as early as a year ago, last March. So almost everything that's in here has been well vetted, well understood, even down to the amendments and the concepts and the discussions from the last year. And why is it important doing this Jobs Act and bringing it together in many ways as a single piece of legislation? It's because conceptually they all link together. It is about capital formation. It is about those small growth companies that create the next wave of employment. And let's face it, this truly is about jobs. It is about economic growth. And the creativity we need in our economy that creates that next generation of excitement and employment come from the types of business that need access to capital. And these are the very ones that this bill moves forward. There's also another point that I hope sort of moves universally from right to left here. I'm one of the believers that capital formation is going to look very different in the future. You know, the old days of you go find an angel investor, and then you go find VC capital, and then you go public, are going to look different. Some of this is because of Dodd-Frank. Some of this is because of what's happened in the regulatory environment. And the beauty of this legislation, it is going to provide opportunity and options, particularly for those growing employers, those small companies that want to grow, want to employ in my home district in Arizona. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we defeat the previous question, we'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts this rule, it will bring up Mr. Bishop's bill, H.R. 1748, the Taxpayer and Gas Price Relief Act. And that would simply do it in addition to this bill with broad bipartisan support. I know there is also broad bipartisan concern about gas prices, a very substantial issue that many on my side of the aisle, Mr. Bishop included, would like to do something about so that American consumers have more of their money to take home. So to talk about his proposal, I will yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Colorado for yielding. I rise in opposition to the rule and in support of moving the previous question. This motion would amend the bill with strong provisions to stop price gouging at the gas pumps and remove unwarranted tax subsidies from the big 5 oil companies. We're long overdue for a serious debate about gas prices. Scoring political points on this issue serves no one and doesn't solve the problem. Here are the facts. Domestic production is at an 8-year high. Imports of oil are at a 17-year low. There are more oil and gas rigs drilling in the United States today than in the rest of the world combined. Let me say that again. There are more oil and gas drilling in the United States today than in the rest of the world combined. The number of oil rigs in operation right now has quadrupled since President Bush left office. Last year, the U.S. became a net exporter of oil for the first time in 62 years. So clearly, rising gas prices do not result from a U.S. supply-driven problem. And this administration cannot be blamed for doing enough to encourage and to facilitate drilling. Nor is rising gas prices a U.S. demand-driven problem. Demand is down by 6.5% in just 1 year and 17% since 2008. There are several factors that contribute to rising gas prices, but U.S. supply and U.S. demand are not among them. Gas prices in the eastern part of my district are up over 60 cents in a matter of weeks. Rampant speculation accounts for most of that, with over 60% of the market controlled by speculators. The speculators' overriding goal is profit-taking, which our legislation targets. Nothing is wrong with profits. They made our nation strong. But profits should not be pursued at the expense of middle-class families, nor at the expense of our fragile economic recovery. This legislation makes sure it doesn't by cutting out speculators. It strengthens penalties for manipulating the market, which forces up gas prices and leads to price gouging. The legislation also cuts out subsidies for big oil, and we should reinvest those dollars in a long-term strategy focused on clean and renewable sources. Mr. Speaker, our debate should focus on a green energy policy free of market speculation and subsidies our nation can't afford. We must tackle this problem rather than using it to point fingers and to try to score political points. Thus, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question, vote no on the rule. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 4 minutes to a man who I believe is one of the clearest thinkers in this Congress. He is a person who studies well, applies logic, and comes out with the deduction of making things better for people who are not in this town, but rather people who are the real part of America. And I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman, Mr. Pence.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, for his leadership, and for his gracious esteem. I rise in support of HRS 572, the rules supporting the Jobs Act and the underlying bill, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, everywhere I go across the Hoosier State, I hear job creators struggling in this economy talking to me about the obstacles to growth, the obstacles to getting this economy moving again for their business. And again, I hear about the weight of federal red tape that stands in the way of capital formation, business expansion, and jobs. Just today I was talking to a manufacturer in the state of Indiana who said to me, Mike, the environment in Indiana is very positive. Our problem is Washington, D.C. And I was able to report to him that in a bipartisan manner today, the Congress was going to take a small but significant step in lifting a regulatory burden on capital formation, and that Hoosier, like I hope all Americans looking in today, was encouraged. You know, the Jobs Act will actually facilitate capital formation, business expansion, and growth by lifting the burden from job creators in a number of ways. It exempts emerging growth companies from certain SEC regulations. It raises offering thresholds for SEC registration. It exempts securities issued through innovative crowdfunding sources from SEC regulation, all of which in plain English means that we are going to change the regulatory environment to help startups and small businesses access public markets. You know, I've always believed throughout more than a decade working on this floor that politics is the art of the possible. And today, we will not do everything those of us on this side of the aisle believe that we should do to jumpstart this economy. But we will do what we can do in a bipartisan fashion in passing this rule and moving the bipartisan Jumpstart Our Business Startups or Jobs Act, H.R. 3606. On behalf of hardworking taxpayers in Indiana, on behalf of that job creator I talked to this morning. I urge my colleagues to come together today to join us in supporting the Jobs Act. Let's give entrepreneurs and investors all across this country the incentive and the regulatory relief they need to get this economy back on track. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
I'd like to inquire if the gentleman has any remaining speakers. Gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman for asking. We did have one person who we believe is attempting to get here, to run here, but I would, at this time, would tell you he's not here. So I would encourage the gentleman to go ahead and close as he would choose, and I would then do the same.
Thank you. And the gentleman is, I certainly extend the courtesy to the gentleman. If the gentleman in his closing wants to yield some time to a speaker, we would
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill here today is a good bill, an important bill. It's not a job solution for our country. It's not a jobs bill. In fact, I think the frustration of some is that to a certain extent it represents the spinning of the wheels that has typified this Congress, and that most of these bills have actually already passed this House. That being said, if packaging them together and passing them again and trying to put pressure on the Senate to pass them is a constructive step towards making them law, then let's do it. I think a strong bipartisan vote of support will help do that. President Obama has said he will sign this bill. I call upon my colleagues of both sides of the aisle to support these bills. These bills help free up our capital markets in positive and constructive ways, allowing small investors the same opportunities as large investors, allowing companies a little bit more flexibility on remaining private over who their investors are, allowing small and mid-cap companies easier access to public marketplaces. This, in turn, makes it easier for venture capitalists and angel funders to invest in startup companies, knowing that there's a better prospect of an exit should they succeed at a smaller mid-cap stage. As we all know, there's a number of contributing factors to the decrease in public offerings that's occurred over the last 10 years, a trend that I think is beginning to reverse. One of those aspects, certainly not the only aspect, is the excess regulation that we abolished through this act. Other things include simply the appetite of the capital markets for public offerings at any given time, and other legal and administrative risks that are not dealt with in this bill that perhaps call for additional legislation. So this is not by any stretch of the imagination a recovery or a jobs bill, but these are very constructive steps that, again, cycling our wills. Yes, we've already passed. We're passing 2 new ones as well. Let's package them together. Let's put pressure on the Senate to send them to President Obama's desk, where he has said he will sign these bills. But let us not, in our effort to continue to push these important pieces of legislation for capital formation, forget that our country faces even more important critical risks before us. We need to get serious about growing our economy, and we need to work hard on a bipartisan basis to implement real tax reform legislation, tax reform that would create a more competitive tax code, allowing companies to reinvest in their growth, rather than taking their money in an arbitrary way or encouraging them to distort the economic reality and the allocation of resources by having certain tax preferences for industries that may be in or out of the favor of government officials. Let's allow companies to invest in their own growth, and encourage private sector job creation, and have real corporate tax reform, as the President has proposed, and the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Camp, has proposed, and many on both sides of the aisle have proposed. I call upon our House to move forward a bill that will fundamentally make American businesses more competitive, and that, Mr. Speaker, we can call a Jobs Act. What else can we call a Jobs Act? We can call a Jobs Act doing something about our national deficit. The fact that the current fiscal integrity of our nation is at stake. If we do not take action over 10 and 15 years, yes, our nation faces an immense financial crisis. We need a balanced approach, a big, bold, and balanced approach As has been outlined by both the Gang of Six and the Bowles-Simpson Commission, there are a number of people on both sides of the aisle that have been calling for real deficit reduction, and yet this House has not reduced the deficit and continued to pass and operate, in fact, under a budget that simply continues these record deficits for the next 10 years. Providing that certainty around the fiscal integrity of our country to allow for long-term borrowing, to ensure that businesses have access to capital and predictability over time, will again do more to create jobs and grow our economy than freeing up the capital markets around a few key areas that these bills accomplish. So, yes, these bills are an important step in the right direction, including the only one truly new bill before us, the others that have already been passed by this House. This is a good package which is a first start to rebuilding our economy. But even after they're enacted, there's nothing that instantaneously happens. They have to be implemented. Accredited investors have to start buying private securities and startups. There's several years before this can translate into actual job growth, which it will, to produce meaningful results. But again, corporate tax reform and showing some interest among this body of actually balancing our budget deficit would send an indication now to the marketplace that would immediately lead to job growth. Mr. Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent to insert to the text of the previous question amendment to the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question. These are important bills, and I strongly support the underlying bill. I encourage its passage, and again, encourage my colleagues to be fully aware that by passing this bill, we are not creating a single job. Yes, by pressuring the Senate and getting the bill to Obama's desk, we can eventually lead to enhancement of our capital markets and some job creation. But this doesn't get us off the hook. Passing this bill and not balancing the budget deficit, as this Congress is currently doing, passing this bill and not reforming our tax code and making our corporate tax code more in line with the international standard, that's not a recipe for American competitiveness or jobs. In fact, this bill alone, if it means the absence of balancing our budget and the absence of making our tax code competitive, is just an anti-jobs bill. You can't bail out a sinking ship. This country needs fundamental change. We need to balance our budget deficit. We need corporate tax reform. We need individual tax reform. I call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take those items up, and yes, as a small positive measure to help free up capital flow, particularly for startups and small and mid-cap companies, let's pass this Jumpstart bill now, and I encourage my colleagues to support the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, to hear the gentleman, his strong voice, not only as an entrepreneur before he came to Congress, but the gentleman, Mr. Polis, as he speaks to us up in the Rules Committee, where he talks about America wanting to have a bright future, the father of a new young son. He looks forward to the day that his son will have a bright future in this country. And I appreciate his words today. He is also correct that we do not create jobs in this town. It's the free enterprise system that does that. But with that comes an equal recognition that this town gets in the way of jobs and job creation. Our taxes are preparing to be raised. The President, the Democratic Party, is all about raising taxes on entrepreneurs and people who get up and go to work every day, and small business, and taking away tax code that benefits women, in particular married women, with the marriage penalty, job creation through incentives that might deal with depreciation. All of these things are part of a pro-growth jobs package, and unfortunately, this House is not together on that. This House is having to, as the gentleman, Mr. Pence, said, make incremental progress as we move forward. Mr. Speaker, this body is big enough to be able to recognize this country's in trouble. And I don't care if you live in Orlando, Florida, or Pensacola, Florida, or whether you live in Dallas, Texas, or whether you live in California. The needs of this great nation are about job creation and ensuring in a competitive marketplace that we keep jobs, that we have ample credit that's available, that we have new ideas like that we're handling today in this bill, but that we also go to some old ideas, and that is when you tax companies or you tax something, you get less of it. And what the Democratic Party wants to do, and the President of the United States, is to tax America, the free enterprise system, to pick winners and losers, and then to try and call that new revenue to this country when, in fact, all it does is offset with higher unemployment. Mr. Speaker, we need a pro-growth economy. We need a pro-growth agenda from the United States Congress. It's not just the House, but the Senate also. We need the President of the United States to understand that his temptation to talk about economic growth should be about job creation, not just about picking winners and losers. We need someone who will bring this country together, not attacking our free enterprise system, not standing up in front of people and saying we can work together, but actually becoming responsible enough to become engaged in legislation that will pass where we can make this country stronger. Republican Party is here today on the floor leading this bill. We've got a rule which allows for 17 amendments, 13 from Democrats, 3 from Republicans, 1 bipartisan. Once again, our Speaker, John Boehner, the gentleman, David Dwyer, the Chairman of the Rules Committee, are intensely interested in having this House work in a bipartisan fashion, but making progress for American people. The American people expect us and want us to do better. Today is a chance where we can work together, pass a bill, put it across the aisle to the Senate, and ask them to please join us in making life better for Americans. Mr. Speaker, I hope all my colleagues support this rule. It's a great rule. It does the right thing. The underlying legislation is wonderful, and we would go ahead and yield our time back at this time. And I ask for the previous question.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Speaker.
The gentleman from Colorado.
On that, I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Resolution 570 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 2842. Will the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, kindly assume the duties of the Chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2842, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize all Bureau of Reclamation conduit facilities for hydropower development under federal reclamation law and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Tuesday, March 6, 2012, Amendment Number 3, printed in the Congressional Record by the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, had been disposed of. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in the Congressional Record by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mrs. Napolitano of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House has wrapped up debate on what's called the Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. It's a bill that deals with regulations for companies that are going public, improving access to entrepreneurial capital. The rule vote's coming up. If the rule's approved, there will be an hour of general debate and 17 amendments. But first, though, they need to finish up work on a bill that they debated yesterday. One more amendment to vote on, this by Grace Napolitano. The bill is a bill that would authorize all conduit facilities under the Bureau of Reclamation to be developed for hydropower. Representative Napolitano's bill would strike language that would waive environmental review requirements. So one amendment vote, then they will move on to finish work on that hydropower bill, and the rule vote for the so-called Jobs Act is coming up in just a few minutes. 15-minute vote on the House floor, and on that small jobs bill, the New York Times' Jonathan Weissman writing about this, and there was some mention of this on the floor too, that on Tuesday the White House released an official statement of administration policy urging House passage of the Republican bill, a rarity from a White House budget office that more often threatens to veto legislation pending before the House. Again, that rule vote coming up. First, though, this amendment vote, it's 15 minutes. We're going to take you to a part of a hearing we covered earlier today. The Senate Armed Services Committee heard from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, and also Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. The subject was U.S. and Middle East relations. In particular, the subject was Syria, and Mr. Panetta saying that the U.S. is currently focused on isolating the Assad regime diplomatically and politically, arguing it's lost legitimacy. He did leave open the possibility of military action, saying that the Obama administration continues to assess the situation. Here's part of his opening statement from this morning.
Chairman Levin and Senator McCain, thank you for the opportunity to be able to discuss with you the ongoing violence in Syria. This tragedy has justifiably evoked the concern and outrage of the United States government, the American people, and much of the world. At the outset, I would like to stress that the President and a broad cross-section of the international community have stated unequivocally that Bashar al-Assad must halt his campaign of killing and crimes against his own people now. He must step aside, and he must allow a democratic transition to proceed immediately. Furthermore, through its repeated violations of human rights, any government that indiscriminately kills its own people loses its legitimacy. This regime has lost its legitimacy and its right to rule the country. This situation demands an international response. And for that reason, the United States has been leading efforts within the international community to pressure Assad to stop his violence against the Syrian people and to step aside. Unfortunately, this terrible situation has no simple answers. And so the result is a great deal of anger and frustration that we all share. There are some members who are concerned about whether we are doing enough to stem the violence in Syria, and that's understandable. And there are others who are concerned about the dangers of involving ourselves in still another conflict in that part of the world, and that too is understandable. Let me try and address these concerns by providing some context for what is guiding the administration's views on Syria and our actions in response to the violence. The turmoil in Syria is clearly part of a larger transformation that has been reshaping the Arab world for more than a year. The change we've seen has manifested itself in different ways, sometimes through peaceful protests and negotiations aimed at a more responsive government, but also, in other cases, in violent uprisings and brutal crackdowns from repressive regimes. Many countries have been affected by these changes, and although each conflict has its own dynamic, it is part of a broader trend that is fundamentally and irreversibly reshaping the politics of the Arab world. Although this is clearly a challenging and unpredictable period of time, our goal must be to encourage governments to do more to ensure that their people can live in peace and prosperity. As a global leader with a vital interest in the stability of the broader Middle East, this administration has been determined to do everything we can to positively shape the course of events in the Middle East. But each situation, by virtue of the politics, geography, and history of each country, is unique and demands a unique response. there can be no cookie-cutter approach for a region as complex and volatile as the Middle East. Nevertheless, from the outset, we have made clear that our response has been guided by three fundamental principles. First, we oppose the use of violence and repression by regimes against their own people. Second, we have supported the exercise of universal rights, the right to freedom of expression, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, the prohibition against discrimination, and the right to vote through genuine elections that express the will of the electorate. And third, we support political and economic reforms that can meet the legitimate aspirations of ordinary people throughout the region. These basic principles have shaped our response to Tunisia, to Egypt, to Libya, and now Syria. The violence there has become increasingly dire and outrageous. As Secretary Clinton has noted, the Assad regime has ignored every warning, squandered every opportunity, and broken every agreement. We are forging an international consensus that the Assad's regime's brutality must end and that a democratic transition in Syria must begin. Although China and Russia have repeatedly blocked the UN Security Council from taking action, the UN General Assembly has given full support to the Arab League's transition plan, delivering a clear message from the international community that the Assad regime has lost its legitimacy, and there are continuing efforts to try and agree on a Security Council resolution as we speak. The administration's focus now is on translating that international consensus into action along four tracks. First, we are working to increase the diplomatic and political isolation of the Assad regime and encouraging other countries to join the United States, the European Union, and the Arab League in imposing sanctions on the Assad regime. These sanctions are having a significant impact. Second, we are providing emergency humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people with an initial commitment of $10 million, and we are working to broaden our efforts at relief. Third, we are working with the Friends of Syria and other groups to help strengthen the opposition, to try to encourage the various opposing groups to unify and lay a groundwork for a peaceful, orderly transition to a democratic government, a government that recognizes and respects the rights of all Syrians, including minorities. And fourth, we are reviewing all possible additional steps that can be taken with our international partners to support the efforts to protect the Syrian people, to end the violence and ensure regional stability, including potential military options if necessary. This approach has succeeded in putting unprecedented pressure on Assad, but it is clear that there is no simple or quick solution to this crisis. We believe that the best resolution to this crisis will be a peaceful, political, democratic transition led by the Syrian people and along the lines suggested by the Arab League. We believe there's still an opportunity to try to achieve that goal, although we will not rule out any future course of action. Currently, the administration is focusing on diplomatic and political approaches rather than military intervention. Guided by our approach from Libya and elsewhere, we believe it is important in this instance that we do the following: that we build multilateral international consensus for any action that is taken. 2, that we maintain clear regional support from the Arab world. 3, that we make substantial U.S. contributions to the international effort, especially where the United States has unique resources that can be brought to bear. 4, we need to have a clear legal basis for any action that we take. And 5, keep all options on the table, but recognize that there are limitations of military force, especially with U.S. boots on the ground. Each situation, as I said, is unique. And as I've said, there is no simple solution here. The reasons for the differences between our approach with Libya and the current approach to Syria are clear. Although there has been widespread support in the Security Council and the Arab League for military intervention in Libya, no such consensus currently exists with regards to Syria. For us to act unilaterally would be a mistake. It is not clear what constitutes the Syrian armed opposition. There has been no single unifying military alternative that can be recognized, appointed, or contacted. While the opposition is fighting back and military defections and desertions are on the rise, the Syrian regime continues to maintain a strong military. And as Secretary Clinton has noted, there is every possibility of a civil war, and a direct outside intervention in these conditions not only would not prevent that, but could make it worse. Even though our current approach is focused on achieving a political solution to this crisis, the Assad regime should take no comfort. The pressure is building on the regime every day. And make no mistake, one way or another, this regime will meet its end. We will continue to evaluate the situation, and we will adjust our approach as necessary. Let me close by briefly addressing the United States' broader strategic interests in Syria and the region. The stability of Syria is vital to this region and to Turkey and Lebanon and Iraq and Israel. All of these countries in the United States have a strong interest in preventing a humanitarian crisis in Syria. But perhaps most notably, Syria is a pivotal country for Iran. As Senator McCain pointed out, Syria is Iran's only state ally in the region and is crucial to Iran's efforts to support those militants throughout the region who threaten Israel and threaten regional stability. Unrest in Syria has already greatly weakened Iran's position in the region, and it is clear that Iran only stands to lose further as Assad is weakened further. As groups such as Hamas distance themselves from the Assad regime, Iran is quickly becoming the Assad regime's lone backer. This shows the world the hypocrisy of Tehran. I cannot predict how this volatile situation in Syria will unfold, but the United States has made clear that we are on the side of the Syrian people. They must know that the international community has not underestimated either their suffering or their impatience. We all wish there was a clear and unambiguous way forward to directly influence the events in Syria. That, unfortunately, is not the case. That is not an excuse. That is reality. Only our clear path, our only clear path, is to keep moving in a resolute, determined, but deliberate manner with the international community to find a way to return Syria to the Syrian people. Thank you.
Defense Secretary Panetta from this morning's Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on Syria. All of that later in our program schedule. You can also find all of it in our video library at cspan.org. On the House floor, this is the first of up to 5 votes. This is a 15-minute vote on an amendment to a hydropower bill they debated yesterday. It's the last amendment vote, this one by Grace Napolitano of California, would strike language from the bill waiving environmental review requirements. Final passage on that bill is just ahead, and also ahead a vote on the rule for a bill dealing with improving access to capital for startup companies that are going public. And the rule for that would provide for an hour of general debate, 17 amendments to consider. So they'll start work on that this afternoon, but likely won't finish it. Yesterday was Super Tuesday, and it was a close one in Ohio for Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum, with Mitt Romney edging Rick Santorum 38 to 37%, but also meant some changes in the U.S. House. Jean Schmidt, Republican of Ohio, lost her primary. And in the race between Marcy Kaptur and Dennis Kucinich, their district was combined, the Toledo and Cleveland district. Marcy Kaptur won that race last night. She is in her 15th term, Dennis Kucinich in his 8th term.